The following is a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.
Welcome to another Brother Asks and Building Better Builders Uncommon Masonic Education presentation. I'm your host, Coach John Nagy, broadcasting live from beautiful downtown Lutz, Florida. It's a sunny day here today, and I've got some brothers up in Washington State that want to hear a presentation on the Ruffians. This particular presentation represents maybe about 20 minutes of a typical 6-hour workshop that I do around the country, and it is designed to convey light to mentors, trainers, coaches, and instructors so that they can assist this next generation of Masons toward betterment in their journey in Masonry. If you are interested in what it is that I'm covering here today, the material that I'm presenting is based on two different write-ups. One is called Building Ruffish, the Uncommon Field Guide for Uncommon Masonic Education, which I lovingly refer to the Field Guide to the North American Ruffian. And the second book is several chapters out of A Brother Asked, which is about the Hiram Abiff legend. And this was volume 1 that I put out about 2 or 3 years ago. This is all about what to say when candidates ask about the Ruffians, specifically the Master Mason candidates, not the ones before, because they shouldn't know about these things. It is all about allegory, my brothers, and the Ruffians. If you do not understand the allegory of the Ruffians, you're not going to understand the characters that are masked behind the veneer of the characters that are portrayed in the drama of the Hiramic legend. To give you a little idea as to how cleverly allegory is masked, if you take a look at the word Prometheus, Prometheus literally means forethought or thinking ahead. And if you're listening to Greek mythology or reading Greek mythology, and you read about the tales about Prometheus, you're really not listening to the tales of a character, you're listening to the literal embodiment, the manifestation of thinking ahead. And if you take a look at all the stories that are involved with Prometheus, it's all about forethought. And of course, he had a well-known brother called Epimetheus, of which we are familiar with the tale of Pandora's box, the afterthought, the afterthinking, the hindsight that occurs with not thinking ahead. And all these stories that you read about the two brothers, Prometheus and Epimetheus, are all allegorical representations, manifestations of forethought and afterthought. They are allegorical expressions of the human condition. Now, we're going to overlay this on the three Grand Masters. The three Grand Masters, although they are portrayed as historical/biblical characters, they're actually allegorical representations of things that are trying to be communicated through the Hiramic legend. In the allegorical representation, we are told that Solomon was the manifestation of wisdom, and Hiram, king of Tyre, was the manifestation of strength, and Hiram Abiff was the manifestation of beauty. All allegorical. Well, if we took that trend and we overlaid it on the three characters that were responsible for the demise of Hiram Abiff and take a look at their names, well, we might actually think that their names, just like Prometheus and Epimetheus, Solomon, Hiram Abiff, and Hiram, king of Tyre. We think that they're just names of characters, but they're actually allegorical representations. And that's what this presentation is going to be pointing out and discussing. It's really, truly important to understand allegory, because Jubilah, Jubilo, and Jubilum are really not names. They're allegorical manifestations of things that we as Masons ought to be very, very aware of as we are dealing with other characters in life. So let's go ahead and explore these three names. There's a bunch of different variations on ritual. The people who are responsible for the death of Hiram Abiff are referred to as assassins in a lot of different jurisdictions. We happen to be, in America, overwhelmingly in the majority of the ritual that refers to the assassins as ruffians, and that is our heritage. And I really like the fact that we have this heritage because it opens up a rich vein of discussion. The first mention of ruffians actually occurred in 1730, 5 years after the supposed creation of the third degree Hiramic legend. It was around 1725 that we first start seeing Master Masons being pumped out of the Blue Lodge experience. And it was in Pritchard's Masonry Dissected that the word ruffian first appeared. Fast forward 30 years later, we have the actual names coming out. And that was in 1760 on page 53 of 3 distinct Knox. It was published in London in 1760. You see Jubilah, Jubilo, and Jubilam. And that's when you first actually read in print the 3 names of the ruffians. Now, as an aside, the ruffians were actually a really neat play on words, because you can think of it as R-O-U-G-H, rough, or you can think of it as R-U-F-F. If you take R-U-F-F, you actually, it is a bridge term. The term is called to trump, which was from a similar game in and around that time. They both were terms that were used to denote not following suit. And if you're familiar with bridge, it is when you can play cards that are not the suit that is being played by previous players. If you overlay this on the theme of ruffians, what do ruffians do? Well, they do not want to follow suit. What was following suit? Well, at the particular time, they wanted to have payment before their job was complete. The temple was not finished, and what they wanted to do is get the master's word before the temple was complete. So they did not earn fully what it was that they were demanding. They were not following suit. They were roughing. And the neat thing about that is it's a beautiful play on words. It tells exactly what it was that they tend to do. Let's do some exploration into the names further. Get into some Latin roots, some allegorical expressions, some celestial manifestations, and some seasonal suggestions. And that's what we're about to explore. So the names, Jubilah, Jubilo, Jubilam. The only difference between the 3 are the endings of each, where you have A, O, and And immediately, if you take a look at that, you recognize, well, good God, I've had a lot of people say, that looks like Latin. And if you explore the Latin roots, you might come up with all sorts of like past, present, and future expressions. You might actually say, well, is that like male, female, neuter? You might even say to yourself, well, it really, after a lot of investigation, say, that ain't Latin at all. It must be something else. Well, if it is something else, maybe it comes from that Buddhist chant, the Om, that you hear going on in the Far East, where the meditation is taking place, and you recognize instantly that and by the way, Joseph Campbell actually goes through this in his Power of Myth with Bill Moyers. It represents youth, adult, age, and believe it or not, there's a 4th syllable, silence, which represents death. And this is at an allegorical level. And we might have, if we don't have any traction to go on, we're just taking pot shots and looking at, well, let's see how far we can press this. Then we recognize immediately that this represents a lifetime, youth, Adult age and death represents spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And youth is when we have plenty of time. Adulthood is when we start getting snagged down in the morality of life. And in age, we are looking to put things to rest because ultimately we're going to be dead and buried, and we want to make sure that our life work continues and is finished. But if you take a look at the age, the autumn, and go one step further and recognize that there are constellations involved, you have Jubilee, which looks like the last word, a letter in Jubilee is the last letter in Libra. And Jubilo is the last letter in Jubilo is last letter in Scorpio. And then we say, Jubilum. No, wait a second. The last letters don't match up. Oh, we were on a very great path there and we thought we were making traction, but the fact of the matter is we had butt kiss until we go back to Latin and recognize that Sagittarius in Latin is Sagittarium, and we have o, and and we're back to AOUM. And if you really don't know what you're looking for, you can go down a rabbit hole and make all sorts of really neat connections that kind of make sense when you do not have any bearing to go on. I'm going to step back and look at some of the assault that occurred by these three fellows. And in the American ritual, we have the 24-inch gauge. That's the first position, or what is referred to lovingly as first base. Then we have the square at second base, or the second position. And last but not least, the last base or third base is the setting ball. And if we take a look at the three working tools that were literally abused by these ruffians, we recognize that the very first base hitter represented all the demands of time. And then youth, we think we have all the time in the world. And if you take a look at what was being manifested by the ruffians, it was being all the things that occur when you do not have time management down pat. You're impatient, you got poor priorities, and you don't have any schedules. Hope this is making sense to you, brothers. And we look at second base, the square of virtue. These are having to do with all the demands of morality. Let me rewind a little bit back to, whoops, wrong way. The demands of time is what happened when Hiram Abiff hit first base, and he met the demands of time straightforward and didn't have any problem with impatience on his own, poor priorities on his own, and his own schedule. But the person he was dealing with definitely had a problem with the demands of time. Whereas the second base, Hiram Abiff, had all his vices and superfluities divested. He had his virtues in place, and he had his morality in place, and he met the demands of morality, whereas the person assaulting him didn't. And last but not least, the demands of completion. The setting ball is a tool of completion. You literally take the setting ball and nudge an ashlar into place. As it is putting into place, you make sure that you have the proper cement in place so that when you're putting it properly in the position and nudging it using the setting ball, it is in place and it is put to rest. It becomes part of the permanent mass. However, the problems with the demands of completion, if you haven't done your work, you have a problem with putting things to rest. You have uncircumscribed and unsubdued zeal. Your passions and desires are not properly managed. And last but not least, you have untempered actions. Why do I say this? Well, brothers, I'll tell you. The modern equivalent of the setting ball is called the dead blow hammer. The dead blow hammer is a tool that is used that is supposed to nudge things into place. It's used in metal work, it's used in a whole bunch of different types of work, and it's used to hit something without causing damage. It's literally overly designed to make sure that you do not damage what you hit with it. Well, back to ritual. We had an absolute zealous workman that wanted what they wanted when they wanted it, and they used a tool that was overly designed not to cause damage to damage what it was being used for. That's how bad the story gets, is that if you recognize the setting malt is indeed a tool that is used to nudge things into place and not cause any damage, and the very thing that this craftsman was doing was damaging the very thing he was trying to nudge.
You've been watching a Brother Asks and Building Better Builders video education series production.